Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and I'll be your guide on this journey from consciousness to cluelessness and back around again. Today on the podcast, I talk to Christopher Soul Eubanks. Christopher is a climate, human, and animal rights activist that was raised in Atlanta, Georgia. He's dedicated himself to doing advocacy work that combats all forms of injustice. After learning the horrors of animal exploitation, Christopher became vegan, began doing community organizing, and has helped co-organize Atlanta's first ever Animal Rights March. Christopher plans to use education, public speaking, and creativity as tools to advocate for the climate, a vegan diet, and the end of all forms of injustice. Here we go. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. You are very welcome. I'm always glad to be a part of anytime I can help spread the word about veganism, animal rights, just give my perspective, insight, anything I can do. I'm always up for it.
Well, I'm really excited to chat with you because I've followed your work for a while and it's very inspiring.
Thank you so much. It's weird when people say that to me. I'm just doing things and people are like, oh, you're doing some great things. And I'm like, well, thank you. It's kind of like just getting appreciated for walking.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing a little more than walking, but you can call it what you want.
But thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the podcast is called Consciously Clueless.
Okay.
And I started with this idea of like, I'm on this journey, I'm learning more. And also some days you wake up and you're like, yeah, I know nothing. I'm clueless and everything in between and being okay with all that. So I like to start with asking, how are you feeling right now in this moment on the spectrum from conscious to clueless? Where are you at?
Ooh. So is there
There's no right answer here.
Okay. I always feel
wrong.
like I'm always on the spectrum. I feel like I am at a zero. I know nothing. And I think that's great. I think we should walk through life not knowing that we know it all. We should be open to having new ideas, new concepts, being able to challenge our thoughts and our ideas constantly. So yeah, in that regard, I feel like I know nothing. And in another way, I feel like maybe I'm at a 7 or 8. Like I went through life learning lessons, and it's not that I've learned everything that I need to learn, but I do feel like I have a strong foundation now. I don't think that my foundation is going to change of who I am and the things that I feel passionate about and the things that make me whole. So on that end, I still have ways to tweak myself, and that, we'll never be at a 10, but I still have some stuff to do. Like even today, I'm doing my first therapy session.
Nice. That's congratulations.
Thanks. And that's the reason I'll be, with the hard cutoff time is because this is my first appointment. I've never done this before. So I'm interested in learning like how to be a better person, how to analyze my behavior better, and just be more well-rounded. So I still have a lot more growing and learning to do. So I'm on both ends of the spectrum constantly.
Good for you. That's a hard step to make that first appointment.
Yeah, it's something I've been putting off forever. Well, not forever, but definitely this year, I went into the year thinking, okay, this is the year I will definitely put a more conscious effort into therapy. And I tried it a couple of times. I tried looking up some information, and my health insurance didn't cover things. It did cover things. I was like, it was just a hassle.
Yeah.
This past week, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to find the closest one, go try it and see what happens. So.
Well, I wish you luck because it's a journey when you start digging into that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when I interview someone, I always do like a last minute kind of check on social media and the website, see what you got going on. And I ended up spending so much time on your website because it was so fun to look through everything. And I didn't even realize some of what you did, and like the photos from sanctuaries and all of that. So there's a lot to cover. But let's start with kind of the most prominent thing, I guess. Tell me about how you became vegan. What was that journey like?
Oh, sure. My vegan journey started early in life. So it started, I would say around the age of 13.
Okay.
One of my favorite books is the autobiography of Malcolm X. So I read that, and his mentor was Elijah Muhammad. And in the book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, there's a reference to the book How to Eat to Live by Elijah Muhammad. And I read that book, and it just spoke about not eating animal flesh specifically. So once I read that, I decided, okay, I'm going to go vegetarian, but I'm going to do it over a slow period of time. So I did it over the course of like 3 or 4 years. I decided to go to not eat pigs when I was at the age of 13.
Okay.
At the age of 15, not eat cows. At the age of 17, not eat chicken or fish. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a mentor or anybody that was vegetarian, vegan. I didn't even know what veganism was. So that was the beginning of my journey. So I was a vegetarian for about 10 years. Then I just kind of felt weird and isolated out of a place. Like I said, I didn't know any other vegetarians. So I started back eating animal products. And then I would say about 5 years ago, I saw the film Cowspiracy. And this was right around the time when I was considering myself trying to be a better environmentalist. And I saw that movie, and I was like, there's no way I can continue to eat animal products and consider myself an environmentalist. You know, that was a conflict for me. So I decided to stop eating animal products that same day. And I would say about 6 months in, I started to research more of the ethical aspects of veganism.
Yeah.
And I would say that's when I truly became like a vegan at heart for ethical reasons. And I started doing activism from there, started organizing and volunteering, started using social media as a way to speak up and advocate. And I guess that kind of is what got me here today.
Yeah, I guess in my head, I'd imagine that you have been doing this for longer. So that's so interesting in terms of the activism piece.
It's only been a couple of years of actual activism, maybe 3 at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say that, at 13, you were making this conscious decision to kind of start this process, what was the reaction like from friends and family and people in your life? Especially, I'm imagining like a young kid making this decision. We don't always give kids credit for like making those decisions. What was that like?
Yes, interesting, because my mom was fully supportive. I will say that she never like went out of her way to, I guess, do anything extra for me for the most part. I mean, sometimes she did. But she's like, hey, I support you. I'll make food for you here and there. And, I'll tend to help you however I can. But on the other end, she was like, I'm not going to change the whole family's diet because of you. So it was just a healthy balance. But yeah, I never really got any pushback, never any real resistance. No one has ever really challenged me, especially at that age, saying, hey, this is dangerous, you shouldn't do this. For the most part, people were very supportive. And even as I became vegan, a lot of people were really supportive. I think a lot of people honestly know it's healthier, even though at times there's a lot of resistance. But I think intuitively people know, there's nothing wrong with eating plants. So for the most part, the reception has been good and positive.
So when you decided like, okay, I'm going to go vegan, and then you started kind of digging in, what was the moment where you're like, oh, this is my life now? Like, I want this to be my life now.
So it was when I did my first form of vegan outreach. And this was when I was with Anonymous for the Voiceless. That was my first time doing animal activism. That was November 3rd, 2021, so that was 2018. So it's funny because I never will remember the day I went vegan, like the actual dates, but I'll always remember. Yeah, I have no idea. So I'm jealous of all the people that say, oh, I went vegan on this day, because sometimes they post it on Facebook.
I'm always like, well, it was the month of August.
Like, all I remember is that it was the summer of 2016. So my anniversary could be today for all I know.
Well, happy anniversary.
Right, yeah. If so. So I started doing activism, vegan outreach. And the first time I attended a vegan outreach event, I knew, I was like, oh, I'm doing this forever. I'm doing this for the rest of my life. Yeah. I don't know if it'll be paid. I don't know if it'll just be volunteering, but just being in an environment, talking to people about veganism, advocating for animals, and educating people about what's happening, it just felt really rewarding, and it felt really purposeful. Is that a word? Purposeful, I think.
It is now.
Okay. So it just really felt rewarding, and it felt like I was giving back to society in a way that I really hadn't felt before. So I knew from that moment, I was like, this is going to be a part of my life forever.
So what is that intersection like? Because I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, of my immediate kind of response when I went vegan was a little bit of that angry vegan stereotype. And I wanted everyone to listen to me. And I felt like, the blinders have come off of me, and I wanted everyone else to take them off too and listen to me, and I'm right. And I know that came also from such a seat of privilege, to just assume that, everyone was going to follow suit and it'd be easy. What is that intersection of being a man of color in the vegan space like?
It's very interesting. I wrote an article with Sentient Media talking about my experiences as a Black man in the animal rights movement. And I would say initially, it's not something that I acknowledged, and I understood some of the things that were, I guess, happening in the animal rights movement when I first entered, and how it related to race and issues of race. But I was just really hyper-focused on advocating for animals, that those things, not to say that they weren't important, they just weren't at the top of my list. They weren't a priority per se. As I've become more vocal and more comfortable and gathered my thoughts and ideas about how I feel about these things, I began to speak more and more about them. But it's very interesting. It's very, at the beginning, it was very isolating. Like, I really didn't see a lot of people of color, a lot of Black people, especially Black men. I mean, at this point, I can count on maybe two hands how many Black advocates, Black animal rights advocates that I've met in real life. Yeah. And how many that I've actually worked with is probably less than that. So it's real interesting, because this is a social justice movement, and it's open to anyone. But when you see that a lot of certain sections of our society, certain groups of our society aren't in the space as much, the wheels start to turn in your head, and you wonder what's going on, and why things like this, why I'm not seeing this representation. Is
this not for me?
Yeah, exactly. And I also spoke about in the article how just growing up in America, I'm just used to being the only Black person in certain rooms, in certain groups, whether it's classrooms, or there's jobs or whatever. I've kind of become accustomed to that. So when I first entered the animal rights movement, it wasn't a bizarre feeling. It was just like, oh, this is another instance where, I'm the only Black person, Black male. And it's funny, because I was with a friend, and we were hanging out one time, and we had this New Year's Eve party. And she's white, so we went to this New Year's Eve party, and nobody at the New Year's Eve party was white. And she was like, "Wow, this is like the first time I've been the only white person in the room." And it was funny. It was just like, I've grown up.
That's your life.
Like I was so introduced to that. I was introduced to that in middle school. I went to a middle school like an hour away from where I lived. And it was literally nothing but white kids. It was like a program. It was called Minority to Majority, where they would take kids from like my neighborhood and send them to schools outside of our neighborhood, I guess, for, quote unquote, higher education. And I did it for a year. And that year, that was like the worst school experience I've ever had. And it wasn't because of the teaching. It was just, I felt so alone. And then that trip was like an hour and a half each way. It was really taxing. So
where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the south side of Atlanta. So East Point specifically is close to the airport down here. And I was traveling early in the morning to a part of Georgia called Sandy Springs. And it was just a totally different dynamic. Like the kids were rich, and it was just a very weird, surreal feeling. So very early, I was introduced to this concept of like being the only Black person in certain social settings. So when I started in the animal rights movement, it didn't stand out.
It unfortunately didn't feel different.
Exactly. Yeah.
So absolutely. And correct me if this is not your experience, but the name minority to majority kind of struck me in a weird way. I don't love it. It feels a little white savior-esque. Is that the vibe I'm getting?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
At the time, I think my mom at the time, she was like, this is a great opportunity.
Totally.
The teachers were like, he'll thrive. He's a great student here. He'll thrive in a better environment. But looking at it now, I see it totally different. Just the name of the program is like, why did I don't know.
It made me bristle. I was like, ooh, I don't love that.
It wouldn't even go today.
No. So, no. Which is interesting. The kind of white saviorism thing, I think that happens a lot in veganism. This like, let me tell you about why you should change your diet. And I had a really great conversation on the podcast a few weeks ago now about this idea of, telling people what they should be doing and not understanding like the cultural background of like why these choices are there for people of color and the history of food. And I think if we don't talk about that, you're just missing so much.
Absolutely. And I think another part of that is, one part of that is just as people, we tend to have these egos, and when things aren't the way we think they should be, we can't accept that.
Yep.
Like I've accepted that there's racism in the world, there's sexism, classism. And I think we as a species tend to think that we are beyond these things. And unfortunately, we aren't. Even though, some of us can understand and recognize that things should be different and should be better, we're still a very relatively young species when it comes down to, we're like, I always say we're like toddlers as a species. We're like in our terrible two phases. We still have so much more growing to do. And it seems like, yes, we should be on this wave of, we're all approaching 5D and we're all pure light, but we are not there yet. Like if you, and that's why when you spoke about that privilege and, understanding how these other communities work, you have to really speak to people and understand their situations, their circumstances, their environment, their neighborhoods, because there's parts of Georgia where I'm like, it's as racist as it was in the 1960s or even further. And that's not only Georgia, but other parts of the world, other parts of the United States. And we tend to get in our little bubbles and, we see people around us, all of our friends are vegan and our timeline is vegan, and we don't see the whole picture. Only 1% of the world is vegan. So that means 99% of the world consumes animal products. And if 99% of the world is doing something, whether you think it's right or wrong, we should analyze that and say, hey, it's not just going to be as easy as the 1% telling the 99% you all should change. There's so much work that has to be done. And so it's a lot to that dynamic. So we have to really look at that.
And be willing to be wrong and learn again and keep moving. I think specifically in some activism circles I've been in, there's this idea of like, well, we have the answer and we know, and we're going to share it and everything's going to be great. Right? Like we don't know, I'm going to be wrong. I'm going to say something dumb and I'm going to, like that's just life. And if we're not expecting that, then we're not going to do the cause that we're looking to, raise awareness about any justice.
Absolutely. Because it's not only about being, and this is like a life lesson. It's not just about being right. Like I've heard that term, you can be happy or you can be right. So it's like dealing with people, it's like we're dealing with live beings, human beings, animal beings. Like people have thoughts, ideas, concepts, fears, emotions. So when you're talking to people, you have to understand that you're not really trying to change people's minds. That's how I look at advocacy. I just, I'm trying to change people's hearts. I'm trying to connect with people. Honestly, that's probably going to be the thing that brings about the most change, is challenging people, but in a way where it's not attacking them, being combative, because you can be firm and stern, but you can also do it in a loving way. You can also do it in a compassionate way. You can be unapologetic, but that doesn't mean you have to be a jerk or mean to people.
And not put people on the defense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because if someone puts me on the defense, I don't want to listen, right? Yeah, like absolutely. That's just natural.
Absolutely. So we have to understand that we're talking to actual people and not robots. It's not like you can just flip a button and they're going to change. No, you have to talk to them, understand, connect, and, do a lot more digging than you would do when you just turn on the computer.
Totally.
Turn on the light bulb.
Well, and I think what you're speaking to is something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I've wanted to find ways to continue to talk about, is just this idea of any sort of change we're trying to make. If we're trying to make the world more equitable in any way, there's, I think, this pushback when people feel like you're telling them that they individually are bad people, instead of hearing the conversation as, oh, these systems are pretty fucked. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to change the system, and we are all products of that. But I've had some hard conversations where I feel like people have, maybe it's the way I said it, maybe it's the way the conversation went, whatever it is, had that defensive reaction of like, well, I'm not a shitty person. It's like, I know you're not, it's the system, but it's hard to, I don't know.
It is. It's, and all of us are guilty of it. Like, yeah. And it's not just about being vegan. I mean, the same thing happens in, just from personal experience, like in the Black community, we deal with colorism. We, deal with these systems of oppression that were ingrained in us. Like when we were, transferred over here, we were implanted with this like white supremacist framework. Yeah. And a lot of people don't even understand that framework permeates through their daily lives, and a lot of the things that they do. They tend to think that, we talk about like decolonizing our brains, that's a lot of work. It's not just as simple as saying, Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's one aspect of it. That's
right. It's not just a training or this or.
Exactly. It is relearning how you come to conclusions. Like how do you form your ideas? How do you, what do you place importance on? Do you place more importance on quantitative things or qualitative things? Do you think, do you put political systems on a hierarchy? It's just a lot of things that we just take in and we have accepted. But if we are really going to challenge these systems, it's a lot of work. So it's not just one thing. And that's why the answer to the world's problem isn't for everyone to just be vegan and everything is going to be fine. It's so many systems of oppression that are placed throughout our society. It's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think that another important aspect in terms of systems that I've continued to learn about, but I definitely didn't have any understanding of in the beginning of my vegan journey, is that intersectionality of like human rights and veganism, factory workers, or any of that stuff. I just think there's so many entry points where you can, if you care about animals, if you care about the environment, if you care about health, if you care about healthcare, like there's just, pick an avenue that you're passionate about and it intersects with veganism.
Honestly, it does. Yes, it's so many. And I think that's one of the things that also is being challenged a lot more that I've seen over the last few years, as opposed to when I first started in the movement. Things seem to be like, okay, these are the talking points. This is the only thing we want to discuss. And, if we talk about anything other than the animals, it's wrong, it's absurd, right, and we shouldn't even discuss it. And, those are the things that kind of contribute to the movement, looking away, feeling a certain way, only having a certain group of people. And it's not that you have to pander to people, we just have to be realistic. If we want more people to be vegan, and we don't see a lot of people of color or Black and brown people or people from the global majority in the movement, we have to ask ourselves, why is this? What's going on? Is this something that's happening by chance? Is it something that we're doing? Something needs to change, because with the current framework, it's not going to be as productive as it could be.
Right.
So it's a lot that needs to be addressed.
I'm curious about your experience. So we started to talk about your experience as a man of color, but specifically, I think as a man in the vegan movement is also an interesting piece because of our connection with like masculinity and meat and masculinity and food. And how has that experience been for you?
It's been interesting. You know, sometimes I wonder if I get more, I don't know the right word, attention because I am a man in the movement. And I feel like if so that, you know, that's unfair, because I mean, I meet more women in this movement than men. But I tend to see the men get propelled, and even myself to a certain degree. And, you know, it's not something that I've done consciously per se, but I can kind of see it benefiting me personally. But also just in the term of like being tied to, you know, consuming animals, being tied to masculinity. You know, personally, I've always kind of, I guess, felt never like the masculine type.
Like the stereotype, it didn't feel like it fit.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess in some ways, I guess maybe some people see that as, okay, maybe he's fitting the stereotype of a vegan. It's like not these, you know, super masculine machismo man. So I don't know. I don't know if people perceive it that way, but I don't know. I just kind of feel I'm just being authentic to me. And I think it comes across genuine to people. I don't feel like I try to, you know, have to make up for any type of masculinity or show people certain types of masculinity in my advocacy. I just approach it from a genuine perspective, and it's something that I really don't think about much, honestly.
Well, I think it's interesting because you obviously care about the environment, health, every other intersecting issue that we've named or haven't been named, but what you focus on is animal advocacy and animal rights. And from what I've seen, anecdotally, a lot of men in the vegan movement are health. That is their like insert, and the way they talk about it is health and some environment too. But it seems like the lane for talking about animal advocacy and animal rights, I don't know if it's because it's supposed to be more sensitive, or it's like animals are like feminine, gender is silly, I don't know, but it seems like there are less men in the role that you are in. And from what I've observed, I don't know if that's been your experience.
Yeah. That's a great point. I will say, I think the most popular and the most, and the ones that are pushed to the forefront. Yeah, definitely are that. Like they fill that role. They check those boxes. I think the ones that advocate more on ethics and morality aren't as propelled. And honestly, I think, well, that's definitely true of the men, but just the movement as in well, not even the movement per se, but just the concept of veganism. Like when people think about veganism, it's not necessarily just about the ethics at first. I think the first thing that comes to mind is diet, health, nutrition. And then below that, you know, some people have conversations about veganism and don't even mention animal rights. And I'm like, how is this even possible? You know, this is about the ethics towards animals, you know, and per the definition, the most recent definition, you know, by the Vegan Society, that's what it was based around. So to exclude that to me just seems asinine. But yeah, it happens often, you know, and I understand because that is a entry point into it. And there's nothing wrong with it per se, but I think we don't need to lose what this is about.
Because I think plant-based and veganism are getting used interchangeably, and it's confusing.
Yeah, I think so. And I always try to make real distinction between that. I try to educate people. I think that's one of the biggest things that the animal rights movement is going to have to do. I don't know how to, execute that. I think it's going to be such a big thing. Like, I think plant-based is going to have to be the term to define just not consuming animal products dietarily, if that's another word. Just making all new words.
I love it.
Yeah, and then veganism is going to be more the term that's used towards the ethics, because I do think that distinction needs to be made, because sometimes I've corrected people and they get offended by the correction. And I'm like, look, I'm not trying to, be disrespectful. I'm just making that distinction, just like I would make the distinction if you said you were a vegetarian and you ate fish. I would say, oh, no, you're pescatarian or whatever you are.
Right. But by definition, it's not that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's nothing to get offended by, but I've seen people get offended by it. So I think it's just all about how you talk to people. And I kind of feel personally, I'm at a point in my life where I'm not arguing with a lot of people. I just don't have the energy. Look, I can have a healthy, honest debate back and forth. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not, getting my emotions all stirred up. I just don't have the time and energy. So look, this is the information. If you like it, okay, great. We can have a conversation. If you just want to go back and forth and be hostile and be bitter, no, I'm ignoring it.
That's a good avenue to go down and not get sucked in.
You definitely will. I don't know, a lot of times I'll open my Twitter and it's always something. It's people commenting. I remember, I don't know, are you familiar with the name Tyra the Taurus?
That does not sound familiar.
So she's a very amazing, outspoken animal rights advocate on Twitter and on just social media in general.
Okay, what was the name again?
Tyra the Taurus.
Tyra the Taurus. I don't think I've heard of that. Huh.
She's incredible. You should. You may have seen her post online. Like, people share her stuff.
Yeah, maybe I've seen it, but I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, I would recommend you talk to her too. She's amazing. She has her own podcast too. But I was speaking to her about how she deals with all of the comments and what her everyday life is like. And she was like, yeah, every day, I wake up and there's 1,000 people in my messages telling me, oh, I should do this or I should be saying this, because she's very outspoken. And it can definitely be overwhelming. And if you choose to engage with it, it can be endless. So I've just gotten to the point where I'm just like, it's just not good for my energy.
It's draining.
Yeah, it is.
If it's not filling you up, then don't do it.
Absolutely.
So how has, at least in my own experience, kind of this vegan journey has opened my eyes to all these other aspects of life and things I care about and the way I see the world? How has, specifically as someone who is in this movement, in the side of ethics and morality, like, how does that inform other pieces of your life?
I think one of the biggest ways that veganism has impacted just my psyche is, so when I was younger, I was around 15, I stopped following any particular religion, just because I started to lean more towards, I just like things that are fact-based, and in terms of, not to say any religion isn't fact-based, but I just started to steer more away from just believing in things solely on faith. Like, I just kind of started needing some quantitative things to support what I believe in. So when I went vegan and I realized that animals were being abused on such a massive scale, I started to think, wow, how did I contribute to this? Like, all these years of my life and not even think about it. And it really made me more aware of the other things in my life where I should probably assess my behavior and be more mindful of others and just society in general. So, it really kind of like a light bulb just went off. I was like, wow, I supported this for pretty much half of my life and thought nothing of it. I walked into the grocery store, saw animal body parts, saw their secretions, and it was just a product. I knew in my mind what it was, because I knew literally I was looking at a chicken leg, or or ground cow body parts, but it just didn't register. And I just started to think, wow, if I could be convinced and contribute to this suffering on such a massive scale 3 or 4 times a day without even thinking about it, what other ways am I programmed? Like, what other work do I have to do? And what other ways do I have to look at the world and start to challenge myself? So it's still a lot of work, like I said earlier, that needs to be done. But yeah, when I went vegan, that was one of the first connections I made. I really started to think, okay, it's a lot more work to do, because if I was able to do that consistently without a second thought, there's other aspects of my life that, maybe are not equal, but I'm still perpetuating something that I don't want to, or something that is against my beliefs.
You just articulated that so beautifully. I'm just like nodding my head ferociously, because I was like, yes. That's my experience. And I want to keep talking about that more, on my platforms as well. Mm-hmm. Just about without that defensiveness, right? Without that, like, you bought meat for how many years? It's like, no, mm-hmm. These are just like systems, and it was normal, and it's normalized, and like, let's unnormalize it.
Absolutely.
It. We're going to keep making up so many words.
Have a whole dictionary, buddy.
Yeah, I'm going to have all these show notes. Like, this is what this term means.
Right.
So have you had any like really fun success stories of like converting someone to vegan in your family or friends that you're like, I never thought this would happen?
Yeah, I have a couple. So one of my closest friends, when I first transitioned into veganism, I was kind of like you. I was like that. I was so bitter about everything that was happening. Mm-hmm. I couldn't, articulate myself and my thoughts into why I'm feeling this way as well as I can now. So we were over her house one night, and we were all having food, and everything was vegan. So I was like the only vegan there. And it was like maybe 10 or 15 of us.
Oh, wow.
So everybody was, talking about why, it's okay to consume animals, or what's the big deal. And I'm the only person. I'm like overwhelmed. I'm like not getting my thoughts out. And,
and you feel like you're defending the whole movement. Like you yourself are explaining like why everything matters.
Exactly.
It's the worst place to be in.
It is. And it was like the first time I'd ever really advocated to such a large
They're like tripping and
I wasn't seasoned at all. Mm-hmm. So and the host, she's like one of my closest friends, and she wasn't, either way. She was just kind of like listening. But like a year later, she told me that pretty much like shortly after that, she went vegan because of, not necessarily what I said, but that was like a pivotal point in her transition. She was like, wow, I kind of need to maybe give this a little bit more thought. So, and like I said, I didn't know that until a year later. And I was like, just talking to her regularly, off and on a regular basis.
And she never told you?
She never told me. I don't even know how it came up. I think I mentioned something about going to a vegan restaurant or something. And she was like, oh yeah, I'm vegan. And I was like, oh wow, how long have you been vegan? She's like, oh, about a year now. Yeah. And she told me, I was like, wow. So that was amazing. And I have a video on my YouTube channel where I spoke to a Marine, a former ex-Marine. And it was such an emotional experience. I ended up crying. Like a few of us were crying because we were at the vegan outreach event. And he literally turned vegan after the conversation. And It was funny that was the first time I had recorded myself having conversations with someone. And I'll send you the link to it.
Yes.
So maybe you can share that in the show notes. But yeah, that was the first, because I have a background in film and photography. So I'm always the one filming, videoing, and always documenting all of our events. So this time I was training someone how to film. So they were actually able to film me having a conversation. And this was the first time I had recorded the conversation. And it was just like an amazing conversation. But he went vegan. He told me that same night. Yeah, he told me that same night he went home and he made his, he didn't make, but he told his son, his daughter to watch Dominion. And after they watched a million, they said they were going vegan. Them and their grandkids, them and his grandkids. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That is such a beautiful moment. And because of all the stereotypes in my head, I mean, I'm like, oh, wow, an ex-Marine, you know, like all those things, talk about masculinity, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
In the military. That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was probably like one of the most touching moments I've had in terms of just, and I don't like to say I convert people. I don't think anyone can convert anyone. I just think it happens over time. But just in helping someone transition and helping someone be aware, that was like the most meaningful moment.
God, that's so beautiful. I can't wait to watch that video.
Yeah, I definitely send you that link.
Yes. So given all the amazing things you're doing, or actually before that, tell us about some of the other amazing things you're doing. Like, what are you working on right now? What are some projects you want to highlight? Like, you have so much fun stuff to dig through on your website. You're a photographer, which now makes sense. You said your background in film and all of that. So just lay it on us. What are you working on?
Yeah, it's funny. Like the last month or so, I've been not doing as many actions, but I have a lot of ideas. So at the end of next month, I'm going to be in Chicago. I'm with this program called Animal Activism Mentorship.
Okay.
So what we do is we teach other people that want to advocate how to be activists. So we have an experience group. So each mentor has a mentee or multiple mentees, and we help them in that transition to, learn how to organize, learn how to create events, how to advocate. We have workshops. So we are trying to teach people how to be activists. And so part of that process is we have these tours every year. So we choose a location or multiple locations in multiple states. And this one will be in Chicago. So it's going to be 8 straight days of activism.
Wow.
So we're going to go do disruptions, speak outs, protests, demos, vegan outreach. And it's just literally every day we'll do maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 events, as many as we can or as many as people want throughout that 8-day week. So
that sounds incredible.
Doing that. It's incredible because the people, we are all staying in like an Airbnb. I think right now, the first time I did it, it was about maybe 15 to 20 of us. I think this time it's going to be about 25.
Okay.
So it will be, and some of these people have never done activism before.
Wow.
So if they come on the tour, they learn how to do actions and they go back home and they can organize now because they've done so many in such a small period of time. It's like almost like a boot camp.
I was just gonna say, I want to come. This is amazing.
Yeah, I'll send you the link just in case. I think we have I don't know if we planned the other tour, but so that's what I'm doing at the end of next month.
Okay.
I'm also in the process of beginning to start my own animal rights organization. I have some interesting things I want to do. I will be focusing more on the content initially.
Okay.
So over the summer, I'll probably put out some content. And the name of the group is Apex Advocacy. So the working title right now is Animal Protection, Equality, Intersectionality.
Oof.
And yeah, so that's the goal, is to kind of keep the focus on the animals, but also let people know that the way we abuse animals, and it affects so much in our society, to kind of help people understand those intersections. Mm-hmm. So, and I have one initiative from that I just thought about literally the other day that I think is going to really be incredible. I can't wait to get that. This has to come to light. I'm just so excited about it. I haven't told anybody what it is yet. I'm not going to tell anybody until I map it out a little bit more. But it's such an incredible initiative. So I'm starting to put my energy behind that. But in the meantime, I work with the Save movement. I am an organizer in Atlanta for the Atlanta Animal Save chapter.
Okay.
We do vigils and we do vegan outreach every month. And I'm also a vegan outreach coordinator for the Save movement.
Okay.
So if anybody in the Save movement, they have 1,000 chapters. So if anybody has questions about doing vegan outreach, I'm the contact person. They'll come to me if they need cars, if they want to know how to have these conversations with the public, they want to know what equipment to buy. I'm the contact person right now. So those are the things that I am currently working on that's got most of my attention right now.
Well, that all sounds amazing. I'm very excited. That's like such a good teaser that there's this idea coming down.
Oh, some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it, but I think it's going to be powerful for the movement.
That makes me even more excited to see what what unfolds.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So given the impressive list of things you're working on, how do you take care of yourself? What is your go-to self-care?
So this has been a struggle, more so recently than before. Like when I first started doing activism, I just threw myself into everything. I said yes to everything. I did X amount of events a week or a month, and I didn't.
And it feels good because you're so excited and you've got all this like new energy, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm tired.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I'm a lot more strategic. I'm trying to be a lot more structured. So one of the things is I'm going to start treating activism like a job. That's kind of been a focus. So although I am, employed in a sense by the SAVE movement, or I'm under a fellowship, I'm looking at the other activism that I do as structured as that. So I'm going to give myself a certain amount of time, hours a week, and there's things that I can't do. Like I literally can't just say yes to everything. So, sometimes there's horrible things that are happening, and people contact me and say, hey, can you come and do this XYZ like right now within an hour? And I'm like, no, I can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know this is a problem, but it can't be my problem right now because I can't burn myself out. I have to be sustainable. So that's how I'm really taking care of myself. I'm just making sure that I'm treating this like it is a job, because that's the only way that I'm going to be sustainable. Some people can do, 20 events in a month. That's not where I'm at right now.
Good for you for drawing that boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not always easy.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done, but I am making improvements. But yeah, I've been taking a lot of time for self. Like this past month, I think I only organized 2 events, and I think next month I'm only organizing 2 events as opposed to, months before where it was like 6 or 7.
Wow.
And I was like, you know what, let me, especially as I'm taking on new endeavors,
right?
I have to, just balance out, okay, there are some good things that I want to do, but if I keep saying yes to the good things, I'm going to not be able to do the great things that I want to do. So I'm kind of looking at the bigger picture now. So it's a challenge, but I'm trending upward.
Well, and I like that you identified too that it's going to change, like you were saying, like, well, it's different now than when I started. And, if we talk again in a year, your self-care might sound totally different. Right.
Absolutely.
Like that's, I think that's a misconception with this like kind of wellnessy self-care thing that gets thrown around without anything behind it. It's like, just take care of yourself, take a bath, and it's like, okay, well, like that's one thing for an hour. But how do you like take care of yourself daily?
Absolutely.
And that's a different thing.
Absolutely. It is a process. And I think structure with me helps out. I have a small morning routine that this past week I haven't been on it as good, but I meditate and I read. I try to read every morning for 30 minutes. So, that's just a little thing that I start my day off with before I check my phone, before I do anything.
Yep.
I try to meditate and read for 30 minutes.
That's beautiful. Is there anything that you want to share or tell the listeners about that I didn't ask about or give you a chance to share?
I think we covered everything. Just if anybody's interested, all of my work and stuff that I do, I try to keep on my website. My website isn't as up to date as it should be, but Eubanks.com, SOULEUBANKS.com. But other than that, I can't think of anything else.
Is that the best place for people to get a hold of you, or is Instagram, or like where can people hang out with you? Because I know they're going to want to after this conversation.
Hopefully so. So I will say, okay, so the best way to get a hold of me is probably through email.
Okay.
With all these social medias.
I know there's too many inboxes.
It's too many. Yeah, it really is. Now there's Clubhouse too. I have invitations on Clubhouse. I haven't even
downloaded that app because I got too overwhelmed.
I literally downloaded it this week. So yeah. So that's there. I got TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. It's just a lot. So email is always good. I also have a Patreon, and that's a lot more accessible. I'm a lot more accessible through there just because you have to donate on a monthly basis. So I have patrons on there and they support the work that I do. So it's very easy to message me on there.
I love that. I have a Patreon too, and it's been really fun to grow community there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing because people, sometimes I feel like I should be doing more on my Patreon, but people are just like, just do the work and, we'll support you. And I'm like, wait, I got to put out this content. And I'm like, they don't even care sometimes. So
Beautiful.
I'm like, okay.
I love that.
Yeah. But email, Patreon are probably the best ways. Then after that, probably Instagram.
Awesome. I'll put all that in the show notes so people can get a hold of you real easy.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was such a good conversation. I hope we continue to connect in the future.
Absolutely. We definitely sure will.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Consciously Clueless. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. Help me get this into the ears of more listeners. Send it to a friend, text it to a family member, share on social media. Whatever you can do really helps me out. If you want to be read on air as a review of the week, head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review, and you could hear it on air next week in a solo episode. If you haven't yet, head over to patreon.com/consciouslycarly. You can join me growing community over there. We talk about self-care, being vegan, sustainability, early releases of podcast episodes. It's super fun. Until next time.